Over 5 decades after his death, Jimi Hendrix is suddenly everywhere again. Not as a fading memory, not as a nostalgic echo, but as a force. His name is back on magazine covers. His music is flooding streaming platforms. Social media is ablaze with clips, interviews, and moments that once defined an era. But this time, it's different. This time, the world isn't just remembering the man who changed music, they're celebrating something new. And no one saw it coming. Because this resurgence didn't rise from a documentary or a movie. It came from a ripple that began with something long overdue. On March 18, 2025, Washington State did something it should have done decades ago. In a ceremony filled with solemnity and thunderous applause, they awarded Jimi Hendrix the Medal of Merit, the highest civilian honor the state can give. The marble halls of the Capitol echoed with speeches that finally gave weight to a legacy, once ignored by his own hometown. State officials stood beside Hendrix's family and representatives from the Museum of Pop Culture, handing over a medal not just for his music, but for the cultural earthquake he triggered. It wasn't just an award, it was a reckoning, a rewriting of history, a long-denied acknowledgement that Jimi Hendrix wasn't just one of the greats. He was ours, and while the halls of government echoed with overdue recognition, the streets were already pulsing with something else, something louder. After 5 years of silence, the Experience Hendrix Tour returned. Not quietly, not cautiously, but with explosive energy that roared through sold-out theaters and arenas across the country. From Los Angeles to New York, fans young and old gathered to witness a revival that felt more like a resurrection. It wasn't just about playing the hits, it was about lighting the fire again, proving that Hendrix's music isn't trapped in the past, it's alive, it's electric, and it still speaks to every generation. But what made this tour truly unmissable was who joined it. Guitar legends and new school prodigies shared the same stage not to mimic Jimi, but to honor his essence. Eric Johnson's precise licks, Marcus King's Southern soul, Samantha Fish's blistering riffs all blended into a raw, reverent force. The goal wasn't nostalgia, it was rebirth. Each performance wasn't a reenactment, it was a reawakening. The message was clear. Hendrix isn't just a memory to preserve. He's a language that today's artists are still learning to speak. Then came the moment that stopped everyone in their tracks. Blues legend Buddy Guy, 88 years old, retired from touring, announced that he would return to the stage for one night only. Not for himself, not for the press, but for Jimi, the man Hendrix once called an influence, the only one in this lineup who ever stood beside him in real time, would now close the tour. It wasn't just symbolic, it was seismic. Buddy Guy stood in Hendrix's shadow once. Now, in this final performance, he'd stand in his light. The show would end, not with fireworks, but with the living testimony of a man who was there when the legend was born. And now, decades later, would help lay that legend to rest with a guitar in hand. But to understand why the world still clings to Jimi Hendrix, why his name still ignites so much fire, even now, we have to go back to the chaos, the heartbreak, the raw hunger that built the man behind the myth. Because this comeback? It didn't start in 2025. It started in the ashes of a broken childhood, with a dream no one believed in but him. Jimi Hendrix entered the world on November 27, 1942, in Seattle, but peace never came with his birth. From the very beginning, his life was tangled in conflict. His father, Al, and mother, Lucille, clashed constantly. Voices raised, fists slammed, liquor poured. The walls of their home didn't just echo with music, they vibrated with tension, with yelling, with the chaos of two people at war with each other and themselves. Lucille was only 17. Al was in and out emotionally, physically, and later, legally. Alcohol wasn't a symptom of their problems, it was the fuel. And Jimmy, small and wide-eyed, was stuck in the middle of a storm he didn't create, but would carry for the rest of his life. It wasn't long before the weight of that dysfunction turned into something irreversible. The state came knocking. 4 of Jimmy's siblings were taken, separated, and scattered through foster care. He watched them vanish one by one, no warning, no real explanation. For a while, even Jimmy was sent away. He was shuffled across state lines, living with strangers in California who barely knew his name. He wasn't just losing his family, he was losing his roots. His world, already fragile, began to splinter. Every goodbye left a deeper crack. Every new face reminded him that he was replaceable. It was more than a broken home, it was the slow death of security. But nothing broke him like the night his mother died. In 1958, when Jimmy was just 15, Lucille passed away from liver disease destroyed by the same alcohol that haunted their household. There was no closure, no funeral for Jimmy or his brother, Leon. Instead, Al Hendrix handed them a bottle of whiskey and told them, "This is how men deal with loss." A sentence that would echo through Jimmy's adulthood. That night wasn't just about death, it was about erasure. The last remnants of childhood were stolen, and in their place, a bitter silence, a cracked foundation, a boy staring into nothing, searching for meaning in the ruins. Then, in the middle of that grief, came a moment no one could have predicted. While helping his father clean out a woman's house, Jimmy stumbled upon an old, broken ukulele, only one string left. Most kids would have tossed it aside. Jimmy held onto it like it was sacred. With no training and no real plan, he began to teach himself how to play. He listened to Elvis records, played the same note over and over, bent sound until it matched the fire in his chest. That one string became his lifeline, and in that strange, quiet moment, something irreversible happened. Music became his escape. It wasn't long before the spark turned into a full-blown obsession. After years of chaos and heartbreak, Al finally did something Jimmy never expected. He bought him a real guitar. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was pride, maybe it was both. But that moment changed everything. Jimmy clutched it like oxygen. He didn't need a teacher. He needed time. Locked away in his room, he soaked in the blues, mimicked riffs on the radio, experimented with chords that made no sense on paper, but spoke directly to his soul. Every sound was a rebellion against silence. Every note was proof that he was still here. He wasn't trying to be a star. He was trying to survive, to make sense of a world that had never made space for him. But surviving the pain wasn't enough. Jimmy wanted to rise beyond it. He wanted more than escape. He wanted immortality. He wanted the world to say his name long after he was gone. And that meant stepping into the spotlight with nothing but raw talent, a beat-up guitar, and the kind of ambition forged only in fire. In 1959, Jimi Hendrix made a choice most wouldn't dare. He walked out of Garfield High School with nothing but a guitar and a dream that no one could see but him. No diploma, no direction. Just the burning conviction that music was the only thing that made sense in a world that never had. It wasn't rebellion, it was survival. In a life full of noise and chaos, the guitar gave him clarity. So, he cut ties. With the expected path and dove headfirst into the unknown, chasing a sound he could barely explain, but couldn't live without. The road that followed was brutal. Jimi wasn't living the dream, he was surviving it. The streets became his foundation. The back seat of an abandoned car, his bed. He played in small, smoky clubs with bands like the Velvetones and the Rocking Kings, places where the crowd didn't care who you were unless you gave them something they couldn't forget. And Jimi did just that. He watched seasoned musicians, like a hawk, absorbing every riff, every trick, every stage move. But then he went further. He flipped the script literally. He played his guitar with his teeth. Not as a gimmick, but as a declaration. If the world wasn't going to hand him a place, he'd carve one out with raw defiance. But survival has a cost. At 19, Jimi was caught in the wrong place, with the wrong people, riding in a stolen car. It was the kind of mistake that could erase a life. The judge didn't mince words, either serve time in prison or enlist in the military. Jimi chose the army, not because he wanted to, but because it was the only way out. What he didn't know was that he was stepping into another form of confinement, one with different walls, but the same cage, assigned to the legendary 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. Jimi entered a world of rules, structure, and silence. It was everything he despised. But then, something unexpected happened. He met Billy Cox, a bass player who saw the same hunger burning in Jimi's eyes. In stolen moments, behind barracks and after drills, the two of them started jamming. Notes became lifelines. Riffs became rebellion. Even in uniform, they were building something different, something louder than the gunfire and stricter than command. A secret brotherhood forged through sound. The Army never really knew what to do with Jimi. He missed drills, slept through inspections, failed marksmanship tests. Rumors swirled. Some said he faked injuries. Others whispered about his sexuality. Officially, he was discharged for an ankle injury during his 26th parachute jump. But truthfully, the military couldn't contain a spirit like his. And so, after just 13 months, he walked out of Fort Campbell with a red guitar, a friendship that would change his future, and a vow etched deep in his soul. Never again would anyone tell him how to live, what to be, or how loud he could be. Back in civilian life, Jimi and Billy Cox didn't waste time. They formed a band, King Casuals, and hit the road. But this wasn't the glamorous tour life. This was the Chitlin circuit, a relentless grind through segregated venues across the South and Midwest. Tiny clubs, thin pay. Some nights, they played just for food. But the stakes were high. If you didn't light up the room, you didn't get asked back. It wasn't enough to be good, you had to be unforgettable. Jimi learned to command attention, not just with sound, but with presence. He pushed harder, played wilder, sharpened his edge in every grimy bar, every hostile crowd. It was here on those smoke-filled stages, under flickering lights, that he learned to fight for every second of the spotlight. But Jimi wasn't made to stand behind anyone. He'd spent too long in the shadows of other people's dreams. The world just didn't know it yet, but he was about to show them why he would never be in the background again. Broke, invisible, and barely scraping by, Jimi Hendrix arrived at the Hotel Teresa in Harlem with nothing but a guitar, a bag, and a dream that still hadn't paid off. Harlem, in the 1960s, was a fading kingdom of soul, jazz, and electric rhythm, but it still pulsed with enough magic to spark hope in the desperate. And there, in the dim halls of that historic hotel, Jimi met Faye. She wasn't just another face. In the crowd, she was the kind of woman who could see fire through smoke. She saw something in Jimi that even he had begun to doubt. She gave him more than a room. She gave him belief. She fed him, encouraged him, pushed him to keep moving forward when rejection felt endless. She didn't see a backup guitarist, she saw a storm waiting to erupt. That belief carried him to the Apollo Theater, the most sacred ground in Harlem for anyone chasing greatness. He stepped on stage for amateur night, guitar in hand, nerves burning under his skin. And when he played, the crowd didn't just cheer, they roared. He won. But the victory was a whisper compared to the silence that followed. The industry noticed, but only slightly. Enough to offer him gigs behind giants like Little Richard, the Isley Brothers, and Don Covey. He took every job. He played every note like it was a plea for a future he couldn't reach. But even in success, he remained unseen. He wasn't the star. He was the shadow behind the light. The problem was, Jimi Hendrix didn't blend in. He never could. He wore bold, psychedelic clothing that didn't match anyone else on stage. He bent notes that weren't meant to be bent. He stole attention with every flick of his hand. And that made him dangerous. In an industry built around big names and tight egos, Jimi's brilliance was perceived as rebellion. Band after band let him go, not because he wasn't good, but because he was too good. He wasn't stealing spotlights, he was becoming one. But the gatekeepers weren't ready for that. They didn't want someone who demanded the stage. They wanted someone who'd disappear behind it. Still, he kept grinding. Finally, he got a chance to record. Tracks like Testify and Mercy Mercy hit the studio with hope, but not the charts. They fell flat. Then came Curtis Knight and the Squires. It seemed like another stepping stone, maybe even a lifeline. They toured, recorded, hustled across the country. But Jimi's name never took top billing. He was the spark no one credited. And behind the music, legal vultures circled. The band looked promising from the outside. On the inside, it was full of invisible traps, and Jimi was walking straight into them. In the desperation to make something stick, Jimi made a mistake that would haunt him forever. In a rush to seize opportunity, he signed not one but two overlapping contracts, one with Sue Records, the other with Ed Chalpin, a name he barely understood. The ink dried fast, but the consequences crept slower and deadlier. What looked like momentum soon became a maze of legal chains. Years later, those documents would come back to strip him of rights, of royalties, of peace. In chasing freedom, he signed it away. Not out of greed, but out of hunger. But sometimes, fate doesn't care about paperwork. Sometimes it only needs a moment. One night, one room, one raw performance to flip everything. And in a smoky basement in Greenwich Village, Jimi Hendrix was about to hit the string that would split the world wide open. In the crowded underbelly of Greenwich Village, where raw talent met desperation night after night, Jimi Hendrix plugged into his amp at Cafe Wah, unpolished, underpaid, and completely unknown. It was just another Tuesday for most people in E. The room, but not for the man sitting silently in the audience. Chaz Chandler, former bassist for the Animals, was hunting for something or someone that would reignite his passion for music. As Hendrix ripped through his set with a fury that didn't match his status, Chandler leaned forward. By the time Jimi walked off that stage, drenched in sweat and still invisible to the industry, Chandler had already made his decision. This wasn't just talent. This was an eruption waiting to be unleashed. And Chandler was going to be the man who opened the floodgates. 12 days later, Hendrix landed in London with a guitar, a head full of dreams, and just $40 borrowed dollars. He didn't know the streets, didn't know the people, but he knew why he was there to build something that would shake the ground. Chandler didn't waste a second. He paired Hendrix with Noel Redding, a bassist with an unconventional touch, and Mitch Mitchell, a jazz-influenced drummer with lightning in his hands. The chemistry was instant. In under 2 weeks, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was born. They weren't a band, they were a weapon. And London had no idea what was coming. The real explosion came at a Cream concert. Hendrix, still a relative nobody, asked if he could join the legendary band on stage. Eric Clapton agreed, not expecting much. But when Hendrix launched into Killing Floor, jaws dropped, fingers flew. Sound turned violent, beautiful, and uncontrollable. Clapton, the reigning guitar god, stood backstage watching his throne being shaken by a stranger. After the set, he lit a cigarette with trembling hands and whispered to Chandler, "You never told me he was that good." In that moment, Hendrix didn't just steal the show. He took the crown and didn't ask for permission. From there, everything changed at warp speed. Their debut single, Hey Joe, debuted at number 41 in the UK charts. But it didn't stop there, it surged upward, carrying Hendrix's name with it. Stone Free followed, pushing the limits of traditional rock. Fans were mesmerized not just by the music, but by the presence. Hendrix didn't play the guitar. He attacked it, loved it, battled it. In just weeks, he went from nameless sideman in New York, dive bars, to headliner in the most electrified city in the world. And London couldn't get enough. The word spread fast. Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Mick Jagger, Pete Townshend, Jeff Beck. They weren't just listening, they were showing up. Night after night, the clubs filled with legends. All of them watching a man they'd never heard of. Until now. Kevin Ayers recalled the feeling in the room. Everyone was swearing in disbelief. Hendrix wasn't the opener anymore. He wasn't even the main act. He was the show, the storm, the one you told your friends about the next day and still couldn't describe properly. Because some things weren't meant to be explained. They were meant to be experienced. But Hendrix didn't just want applause, he wanted revolution. And the next time he lit up a stage, he would do it with fire. The Who had just blown up the stage, literally. Their signature finale of smashed guitars and destroyed amps had already whipped the Monterey crowd into a frenzy. But then, Jimi Hendrix walked out. Calm, composed, and carrying something no one had seen before, not just a guitar, but a vision. As his final song built to a deafening crescendo, he fell to his knees, cradled his Stratocaster like a wounded beast, and whispered something only the strings could hear. Then he lit a match. The flames danced as if alive, devouring his instrument, in a blaze of sound and smoke. He wasn't just ending a set, he was performing a ritual. This wasn't rebellion, it was resurrection. The crowd didn't know it then, but they had just watched a mortal become myth. The moment was frozen in time, literally. Photographer Ed Karayev snapped a shot just as the fire kissed the strings. That image, Hendrix kneeling before his burning guitar, would become one of the most iconic photos in the history of music. Not because it was dramatic, but because it captured something spiritual. Hendrix wasn't just making noise. He was challenging the gods of music themselves. The look in his eyes, the offering of flames, it was raw, dangerous, divine. American audiences had never seen anything like it, and they would never forget it. From that moment on, Hendrix wasn't a performer. He was a prophet, and the world couldn't look away. Then came the album that would confirm it. Are You Experienced? Released in May 1967, it wasn't just a debut, it was an earthquake. Blues collided with psychedelia, distortion became poetry, and every track bent reality a little further. Songs like Purple Haze and The Wind Cries Mary weren't just hits, they were sonic revolutions. The UK charts kept it alive for 33 straight weeks. The only thing keeping it from number one? Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But even then, Hendrix had something the Beatles didn't: fearlessness. He didn't just experiment with sound. He reinvented what sound could be. Each riff was a challenge, each solo a sermon. By 1968, Hendrix was no longer just recording music, he was engineering a world. Electric Ladyland wasn't just another album, it was his rebellion against the machine, his refusal to be shaped by producers or studio heads. This was the first and only album he fully produced, and it was chaos controlled only by his perfectionism. And it worked. The record hit number one on the Billboard chart. Tracks like Voodoo Child, Slight Return, and his transcendent cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower weren't just crowd favorites, they were declarations. Hendrix wasn't covering Dylan. He was elevating him. Even Dylan admitted it. Hendrix had taken the song to a place even its writer hadn't imagined. But Jimi wanted more. He wanted a kingdom of his own. So he built it brick by brick, beat by beat. Electric Lady Studios was supposed to be his fortress. No more studio politics, no more rented time, no more compromise. He designed everything from the curved walls that softened sound to the psychedelic murals that turned each room into a creative sanctuary. But what started as a dream quickly became a financial nightmare. Construction delays, design revisions, and unexpected costs devoured the budget. What was meant to save money ended up costing nearly $1 million. Even with sold-out tours and massive sales, Hendrix was drowning. And he hadn't even played his first session inside its walls. But while Hendrix was building temples and breaking records, something darker was rising behind the curtain. And this time, not even fire could protect him. It began like fuel for the fire LSD. In the beginning, it wasn't an escape, but an expansion. Jimi Hendrix found himself tapping into realms of creativity that felt limitless, like the universe itself had unzipped and spilled its secrets into his soul. Songs like Purple Haze weren't composed, they were conjured. Visions became verses. Melodies bent time. The guitar didn't sing anymore, it spoke in tongues. And for a while, the chaos made sense. The trippy colors, the surreal thoughts, the otherworldly soundscapes they gave him, the freedom reality never had. But freedom, without grounding, becomes a void. And as Hendrix went deeper into the kaleidoscope, something began to shift. The visions blurred. The line between music and madness began to fade. What had once set him free now mirrored everything. He was losing control of LSD opened the door, but it didn't close it behind him. Cocaine followed, then hash, then amphetamines to stay awake, and alcohol to come down. The cocktail changed daily. The schedule was manic. Tour, record, tour again. Every note had to be bigger, louder, more explosive than the last. But beneath the wild applause, there was noise, the kind only he could hear. Friends started seeing the cracks. He was becoming erratic, paranoid, silent in rooms full of people, furious without warning, exhausted even when standing still. The stage lights never dimmed, but Jimi was no longer shining underneath them. He was flickering, and no one could reach him. Then came the night that stripped the illusion of peace. A drunken argument with his girlfriend, Carmen Barrett, turned violent. A vodka bottle, thrown in rage, struck her above the eye. Blood. Stitches. Silence. The public didn't see it, but those close to him did. The calm, cosmic wanderer fans idolized had another side, a dangerous one buried behind closed doors and long shadows, the kind of darkness that fame can't excuse and love can't fix. And just when it seemed it couldn't get worse, it did. May 1969, Toronto International Airport. Customs agents searched Hendrix's bag and found heroin and hashish. 2 felony charges. 20 years in prison, if convicted. He walked on stage that night and played like nothing happened. But behind the curtain, he was already preparing for a future in chains. By some miracle, some twist of legal fate, he was found not guilty. But the scars remained. He had faced the fall and narrowly escaped it. But something had changed. The music wasn't soaring anymore, it was stuttering. He missed rehearsals, forgot lyrics. Solos lost their edge. The show fell off. Fans noticed. Bandmates whispered. Hendrix wasn't fading away, he was unraveling. In real time. His body was still moving through performances. But his mind? It was buried under static and smoke. The man who once made time bend now struggled to keep time at all. Then came the rumors. Women claiming he fathered their children. Tabloids circling like vultures. Accusations, lawsuits, whispers. The man once heralded as a revolution was now being dissected as a disappointment. Headlines no longer praised his chords, they catalogued his collapse. He wasn't just burning out. He was breaking apart, piece by painful piece. And then, one September morning, the silence became permanent. September 17th, 1970. London was cold and heavy with silence. Jimi Hendrix returned to his hotel room with Monica Daneman after a long night of drinking, the kind of night that felt more like retreat than celebration. He was sick, worn out, spiritually and physically drained. The weight of fame, the chaos of addiction, the unraveling of everything he had built it all pressed down at once. That night, he swallowed 9 Vesperax sleeping pills, 18 times the recommended dose. Whether it was desperation or a desire for rest, no one would ever know. But what followed was irreversible. In the hours that came next, Jimi Hendrix slipped into a sleep he would never wake from. At exactly 11:27 a.m., an ambulance arrived at the Samarkand Hotel. The door was unlocked. Inside, the scene was devastating. Hendrix lay in bed, lifeless, the pillow soaked in vomit. The man who once set guitars on fire was now eerily still. The flames were gone, but the questions they burned. Where was Monica? Why had she left? Why did she tell different versions of that night? Scotland Yard reopened the case decades later, searching for clarity in the silence. But the truth remained hidden behind contradictions and half-truths. In the end, Hendrix didn't die on stage or in a blaze of rock glory. He died alone, choking, in the dark. And yet, even in that stillness, the noise of speculation never stopped. With his death, he became more than a legend, he became a symbol, like Janis Joplin, like Jim Morrison. Later, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, the infamous 27 Club. Brilliant minds stolen too soon, each name marked by genius and tragedy. But there was something different about Jimi. His light didn't dim with time. It detonated. What should have faded into history only echoed louder. While others slipped into myth, Hendrix became a movement. His name stopped being just a memory, it became a message. And in 2025, the world finally gave him what it had denied him in life. Recognition. Washington State awarded him the Medal of Merit, its highest civilian honor. The Experience Hendrix Tour returned with full force, and in a moment that left audiences breathless, 88-year-old Buddy Guy, his idol, his influence came out of retirement for one night only. Not for money, not for press, but to play for Jimmy. To stand on stage one last time, guitar in hand, in honor of a friend who never got to grow old. Because as John McDermott once said, everything comes back to the music. Hendrix may be gone, but his sound never left. His guitar still cries in solos. His riffs still tear through time. His spirit still lives in every artist who dares to break the rules. He didn't just chase something greater than fame he became. Immortal not by myth, but by impact. Because even in death, Jimi Hendrix keeps playing, and now the world is finally listening again. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.